good analysis of something can really enhance your appreciation for that thing. Even something that you haven't seen or read or listened to, you can appreciate when someone has given you a good analysis of that thing. You might have never even listened to an album, and if someone talks about it in a good enough way, you might appreciate that album. Obviously, it's never going to be your favorite album, you haven't listened to it. But the fact that someone can put what makes it so important to them in words means that you can communicate that. But analysis is a double-edged sword. As much as it can enhance your appreciation of something, it can also limit your appreciation if the analysis is done on a shallow enough level. Let me give you an anecdote. I was in school and I distinctly remember this being the only thing that I actually learned from school. I have no other memories of something that still sticks with me to this day, but this one lesson, this one day, I actually walked away from school having learned an important lesson. It was literature class, and it shouldn't be any surprise that that was the only class that I ever really looked forward to. I tried to meme myself into being a science person, but as everyone knows, I like books, I like writing, so it was fairly obvious that the literature class would be the one that I like actively participating in. And it wasn't just that I participated in the class, I also had many conversations with literature teachers who recommended me a lot of books that were really good and were really important to me. But this time we were, as a class, discussing a book that had been really important to me, and that was The Little Prince. This book was something that I had been really appreciative of for my entire life. It wasn't that I needed to appreciate the book more, it was already one of my favorites. I remember before the class started, I was talking to everyone about how good the book was. I was telling everyone how they should read it and how much I like the book because it's an amazing book. And then I remember the teacher coming up with this point that still sticks to me this day, where she basically said that a somewhat unique thing about the book, right, since it tackles the issues of being a child and seeing adults and growing up, is that no matter what age you are, the book can still have a different type of value to you. A child would have a completely different reading of the book than a teenager, right? And an adult would also have a completely different reading of it. And that's not because children have some magical eyes that can see hidden lines of text. That's simply because the way that the book communicates various problems and various events apply differently to people who have different amounts of experience. So what this ends up meaning is that if you read The Little Prince all throughout your life, it enhances itself to an extent. Because not only do you get the one reading from it, not only do you get the reading from it that a child can get, not only do you get the reading from it that a teenager can get, you can get all of the readings from it. You can understand the book on a very intimate level. Now, this isn't to say that it's somehow super complex or deep and you can never replicate it, right? You can be an adult, right, and you can imagine yourself as a child. You can see what you could have taken away from the book. But the fact of the matter is that you will never take those things away from the book, right? Because you aren't a child, and more likely than not, these are things you have already learned. And more likely than not, you just don't have any interest in learning any of these things. So while the book is still great, while you can still appreciate the book, it doesn't really play into your own personal narrative of life to a similar extent that it would have when you were a child. And then the substitute teacher came in. She was some student from university probably around the age that I am right now, right? She wasn't any ancient sage of great wisdom, but she came in with this analysis, right? To complement the really beautiful, really profound analysis that the literature teacher had given, right? And she said that the book was about the divorce, right? Because the author had been going through a divorce when the book was being written. So she came in and said, like, look, these things in the book can be compared to a divorce. So that's what the book is about. So that was fucking awful, right? Because it's this really profound book with these really great themes, and reducing it to something as human and something as small to an extent as even the worst divorce imaginable, right? Doesn't seem fair to the people who write the book, right? Because it doesn't capture the experiences that the people who read the book went through. It doesn't capture what the book is trying to convey. It only captures the personal history of the author. It doesn't help you interpret the book, really. It doesn't help you appreciate the book. It doesn't help you understand the book. It just helps you act as if you know more than someone else, because you have the piece of quite pointless trivia that the book was formulated through a time where the author was going through a divorce. And now you can say that, look, these elements were inspired by that, right? And that would be valuable. That would be valuable to an extent, right? It wouldn't, like, I don't. As much as I support the idea that the authors should be fucking murdered, I don't support the death of the author. I support the genocide of every author. I can understand how understanding the history of a work can be useful in interpreting it for yourself, right? I don't think it's the right interpretation, right? I don't think what the author meant is the thing that the book should mean. But I think it's one way that you can help understand the book for your own purposes, right? But that type of approach where you just take the most literal, most surface level thing you can possibly take away from a book has always been really icky to me. It has always been really upsetting, even to an extent. And I don't want to ever deal with the narratives around the book. I don't want to deal with the petty fucking plot points or continuity issues. I've never been interested in that. Like I've never been interested in the cinema scenes type of nitpicky critique. Like, oh, this guy's shirt looks different here than it looked there, right? That has never been interesting to me. And I know a lot of like Reddit types. Not to disparage if you fall victim to this complex, but a lot of Reddit types think that this is the be all and end all of critique, right? The point isn't to have a compelling story with compelling characters and themes that you can explore for months or years or centuries or however long. The point is to create a work with the least amount of flaws, and the point is to create a work that is just born out of a personal complex or other. And that's such a misunderstanding of art, right? Because people don't make art so they can express some trivial fact about themselves, right? Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you just want to make a song because you're sad, right? And that's the point. That's the point you're trying to make. But generally, when you're making art, it's because you want to communicate something, right? And you can't communicate that by simply retelling events. Art, by virtue of being art, right, is always more significant than any event, and it's always more significant than any personal detail or any detail within the artwork, right? Lacking a comma in a place does not make a fucking masterpiece of a fucking novel any worse. It just means it doesn't have a comma in it, right? doesn't matter if the art can manage to communicate. That's the important part. This keyboard is the most vile object I own. And I'm not talking about this one. This one is great. I'm talking about this piece of shit. I'm really grateful that this keyboard ended up being a colossal waste of money and that I barely ever used it. Because the reason I bought this keyboard was because I was incredibly obsessed with working. I was constantly writing and I thought that I had to be constantly writing. I thought that even when I was so exhausted and depressed that I couldn't get out of bed, I should still be writing, and that's why I bought this keyboard. My plan was to, even when I can't get out of bed, be able to write. Now, for obvious reasons, that never worked out. I never really ended up using this keyboard in that context. I generally just used this mouse to go from one Naruto episode to the other when I was so burnt out that I just didn't have anything else to do. Because I had this obsessive idea of writing 3 books before I turned 16. So for some bragging rights in the future, I could be like, yeah, I wrote 3 books when I was 15. Now those books were fucking garbage because I hadn't edited them yet, right? And even right now I would think they're garbage because they're just fascist dribble, right? But at the time I thought it would give me some insane bragging rights. And in my future autobiography, where I was the biggest fucking political theorist in the world, right? I could be like, yeah, I wrote 3 books when I was 15 or whatever the fuck. So I was really obsessed with this idea. And the funny part is that by now, I've pretty much forgotten that I even did that, right? It took me making this video to actually remember that that happened. It was such a fucking stupid idea. But I was genuinely under these complexes, right? That I should write a book every month and I should read like fucking 300 pages every day and I should just constantly be doing these really tiring, exhausting things and that I never could have a break. And this was the peak of that. This was the greatest symbol of that mentality. Because buying this keyboard was me directly telling myself that I should never have an opportunity to rest. I should never have an opportunity to take it easy or slow down. And even when I can't get out of bed, I thought that I should have been writing, right? Even when I was in so much fucking pain and I was so fucking tired and so fucking depressed, I should still be writing. This inevitably led to a very massive sense of burnout. I ended up for 3 or 4 months unable to really do anything at all. I wasn't able to write anything, I wasn't able to talk to my friends often, even though I didn't even really consider them my friends at that point. And the only thing I really could do was be in bed, watch Naruto, play Eternal, and just do my best to think the least possible. And I'm really, really glad that I never used this keyboard for its intended purpose. Because its intended purpose was to serve as an implement of torture against myself. And that's not something I would wish upon anyone. I had a shitty childhood like everyone else. The one thing that really characterized a lot of my life growing up was the fact that I was always really autistic and really obsessive. But my parents were really poor and my screen time was really restricted. So I could never really collect something in the way that I wanted to. I could never really experience my autistic obsessions. Oftentimes, I wanted to watch a movie. I don't know how many times it happened, it might have just been a few times, but this is a thing I distinctly remember. I wanted to watch a movie, but I wouldn't be able to because I was only allowed to use the computer for 30 minutes a day, and that meant that I had to watch the first 30 minutes of a movie, then skip back to the beginning and start over because I couldn't just keep going from where I left off. Right, I had to watch the entire thing in a row. And these types of obsessive tendencies have stayed with me for my whole life. And the only difference is that right now they're encouraged, they're possible to follow through with. Because not only did my parents not have the ability to facilitate my obsessive tendencies with things like toys or so on, which I do not fault them for, right? And not only did they restrict my time that I could spend online or on the computer, which greatly restricted my ability to be obsessed with cartoons or be obsessed with anything else of that nature. They also had this notion that I should have a broad, holistic view of the world. And the way I cared about things was that I always tried to learn everything possible about some really specific thing. Like, for example, uh, if you've been on science YouTube or if you've been on the pop cultural discussion of quantum physics lately, right, you've probably heard of the pilot wave theory, right? This theory has a very obvious and very specific appeal. It doesn't really rely on any of the metaphysical assumptions that many other quantum theories have, right? It doesn't rely on observers and it doesn't rely on any type of magical thinking, right? It seems like the most naturalist possible interpretation of quantum mechanics, which, given how wacky quantum mechanics are, this might not be the best interpretation, right? It just might be the one that fits the most neatly into people's biases, especially if those people like to think of themselves as scientific people, right? Because what it means to be scientific really means to be naturalist, right? It means to not believe in any type of magical thinking. It means not to think that divine entities are interfering with the world, right? It means that you don't think that there are some supernatural phenomena behind things, right? And most interpretations of quantum mechanics require you to think of something as being supernatural. Now, I was really drawn to the pilot wave theory way before it was popularized, right? This theory had always been the one that really stuck out to me because I saw that it didn't require a non-determinist worldview, it didn't require a uh, observer effect, right? And it could explain all of these phenomena to a sufficient degree only using seemingly naturalist conclusions. I used to say that this is always how I have interpreted things, right? Instead of getting a holistic understanding of the history of quantum mechanics, right? Instead of getting a holistic understanding of the field of physics, I was like, I want to know quantum mechanics. And when I wanted to know quantum mechanics, I was like, oh, this Bohm guy, he seems cool. Let me look into the pilot wave theory, right? Because I didn't care about the actual observations. All I wanted is one theory I could like. And then I researched that one theory. And then I felt like I had a sufficient knowledge of quantum mechanics, right? And these types of tendencies, even though uh, they can be really useful very often, were really unsavory to my parents. They never scolded me for them, they never punished me for them, but there was this consistent implication that this was the wrong way to learn. There was this consistent implication that this wasn't how people were supposed to learn. You were supposed to follow the principles of liberal education, right? Where any piece of knowledge is a part of a greater whole, and to appreciate that knowledge, you have to first appreciate the whole, which in some fields it's really important, right? When it comes to history, for example, just having a partial understanding of history is pretty much useless, right? One piece of history can never really tell you that much. And the more in depth you can take history, the more holistic your appreciation of history is, the more interesting your conclusions can be. And the same goes for fields like psychology and sociology, because these are necessarily interdependent. No one theory can explain the human mind. So if you don't have a holistic understanding of all of these theories, then you don't really gain that much from just knowing that some experiment took place, right? But this was never how I approached the world, right? And there's a reason I really look up to people who can see the world in this way, even to this day, right? Like there's a reason that someone like Lindy Beige can get these really comprehensive understandings of historical events in the wider context and so on. It's so impressive to me, and there's a reason why I really appreciate things written by people who have these holistic views or made by people like Adam Curtis documentaries have this really holistic view of the world to an extent, right? It's obviously really cherry picked, but it's cherry picked in such a way that you can reach interesting conclusions from the sums of events instead of having to just interpret a singular event. But on a personal level, I was always an obsessive, and for a long time I really looked up to people with ADHD because to me that was how the world presented how I should be, right? I shouldn't just hard fixate on a specific thing, right? I shouldn't just have this autistic interest of only one thing at a time. I should have a really holistic understanding of all of these different things, right? And only then would I be worthwhile or have important things to say. And people with ADHD to me seemed like they were that types of people, right? They didn't have to succumb to obsession, right? They didn't have to be in a place where they had it. They needed to fucking watch a movie from the start every time, right? They didn't need to have all of these autistic obsessive compulsions where you gravitate to like really long things and then you start from the start and then you end at the end, right? And it felt to me like that was a sort of freedom. Now, as an adult, I obviously know that that's not the case, right? I know that there isn't some magic power that people with ADHD have that allows them to actually have like this holistic, non-obsessive way of seeing the world. And oftentimes it's the exact opposite, right? And I can appreciate this now. I can appreciate the fact that there are downsides and there are upsides to every type of neurodivergence. But as a kid, I really despised my obsessiveness because it only brought me pain. Because I could almost never have a full collection of anything. I could almost never have enough time to spend on a computer to engage with my virtual obsessions. And even when I had my iPod Touch, right, which was the only thing I could use for an unlimited amount of time because it wouldn't shut itself down when I used it for too long, I still had to use it in secret, right? So my obsessiveness never paid off. And it always just caused me pain. And it took me a really long time to learn how to properly appreciate my obsessiveness. And it took me even longer to understand how not to go too far with it. And the way I learned English was through obsessively watching cartoons. I don't know why, but as a kid I had this notion that I had to watch every episode of every cartoon. Even things that I never really liked, right? Like Family Guy or American Dad. I just used to get obsessed with, and I used to think that I had to see every episode of, for some strange fucking reason. I have seen every episode of The Simpsons from episode 1 to the end of like season 23 or something. Even though I didn't like it, I never liked The Simpsons. obviously there are some good episodes in the first few seasons. I don't think it's all bad. I don't think it's some fucking horrible show. It's fine. It has its moments. I was never that drawn to it. It was never like an important thing for me. But for some reason I thought I had to see every episode. And with SpongeBob, right? I also thought I had to see every fucking episode of it, right? Now, my dad told me when I was really young that SpongeBob only had a few seasons, like the first 3 seasons or whatever. Now I know that those are supposed to be the good seasons, so I don't know if my dad lied to me because he also knew that the show went to shit after those seasons, or if he just thought that there were only 3 seasons of SpongeBob. But for a long time as a kid, I thought that SpongeBob only had 3 seasons in the movie, right? I thought it didn't go beyond that. So I never really had the urge to watch SpongeBob for that long. And I mean, there were some great shows I watched, like Futurama and Adventure Time, that I still think are pretty great. But the most important thing that would last the longest for me was my appreciation for shonens. Now, when I was younger, I didn't really know how to, like, speak English. So when I watched things like Phineas and Ferb, and when I watched things like Pokemon or Dragon Ball, the original series, because I dropped Z fairly quick because the Freeze arc had so much fucking filler, and the filler was fucking awful, so I didn't want to watch it. Anyway, yeah, so when I was watching these things, I was actively learning English. And when I was watching YouTubers, I was actively learning English, and I had to do this in secret. And I'm really glad I did those things because now every form of expression, right, that I have kind of relies on me being able to speak English. And you might have like, oh, what if there's this alternative universe where you only speak Estonian, so you make real friends and you make Estonian art and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on, right? But like, to me, that's kind of a cope. I don't think there's ever a situation where I'll find as many like-minded people around me as I have found on the internet. And I don't think I would ever be so drawn to making art if I knew that only a very niche market would ever have access to it, you know. So a lot of my self-expression relies on the fact that I can speak English, and I can do so at a level that's not to brag too much, right? But it's beyond the average level of most people who have English as their first language, right? Like when it comes to vocabulary and so on, like my pronunciation isn't that great and my accent is really thick. But even those things aside, right? I have a pretty great grasp on English. And the way I learned it was through watching cartoons, and the first cartoon, or anime rather, that I was able to fully comprehend because my grasp on the English language had just gotten to an advanced enough point was Naruto. And I don't know if the significance of this show is tied so much to the fact that it was the first show I could understand. Because there were other shows that I watched as a kid that were translated to Estonian or had Estonian subtitles like The A-Team or some Estonian murder mysteries or Knight Rider that I watched with my dad, right? I could understand all of these things, but I didn't really have the same type of experience with them because watching them was never in my own control. Watching them was never something I chose to do because if they were on TV, I had to be at my grandma's house, and I had to wait until they came on TV, and I had to watch the not Zorro cartoon, the Zorro show, and I had to watch the A-Team show when it aired, and if I wanted to watch a soap opera, I had to wait until that aired, and it was never in my control. But if I was on my iPod Touch, if I was watching Naruto, I could always control when I saw it and how I saw it, and it was something I actively chose to do. And it was something I could understand and something I could enjoy. The only thing that I had unrestricted access to be obsessive about, were books. Now, I still only had a limited amount of energy. I nowadays think that I read so much as a kid, but really what happened was I read relatively light books in general, and I was just way more satisfied with the pace that I was reading them at. Because when I think back on like some great reading experiences when I was a kid, right? It was like, oh, I spent an entire day reading a 200-page book, and that was to me like some great feat of reading. And now as an adult, I know I can do that in 4 hours, right? So it's like, oh, why would I spend an entire day on it? I should just read it in 4 hours, and I'm a loser because I can't do it, right? And none of these complexes existed as a kid. I could just read at my own pace. I could read in a much more enjoyable way, right? So it wasn't just that I read series, right? I had this book, which is uh, I forget the English name always. The Mysterious Island, I think, is the English name too. I had this book that was really important to me. This is still one of my favorite books. It's a Jules Verne book. It's amazing. We had Roald Dahl books, right? I was really into Harry Potter as a kid. There were other like young adult type fucking fantasy series I was really invested in. Because even if we couldn't buy a book, right, I could always go to the library, which wasn't that far away, and then I could just get any book I wanted, right? We still had like a bunch of books here. My mom really likes having books, so she just bought me books fairly often for like any event she had an excuse to. And here we have also a bunch of other books that I read as a kid and really enjoyed. This one stands out to me because it was like the first epic I read, and that was really cool. This was also a fucking great book. I really like this book too. I know that a lot of it won't resonate because I'm just pointing at fucking books. But these were the things I was always really obsessed with. And the thing is that I was always really obsessed with magic systems, right? I wasn't just obsessed with magic as an idea. I never really cared that much for like the power fantasy of it. I always really liked the ability to like categorize and quantify magic. I liked being able to put these things in a system. That there was this phone app which had like all the Harry Potter spells, and then you would wave your phone around in the right pattern, and it would cast that spell. And that was so cool to me because I really liked the ability to just go through the motions, right? It wasn't. It was partially the power fantasy. It was partially the fantasy that I am a Harry Potter character and I have a spell, right? But mostly, it was just the ability to see all of these spells in a quantifiable and reproducible way. And that was always really interesting to me. That was always something I really liked in any fantasy novel, really. Like, I was also always really into the concepts more than I was into the actual story, right? Where there were like these ancient artifacts and these great spells, and I was always really into world building. I really liked well built worlds. I liked when worlds had character. Like that's another reason I really liked Harry Potter when I was a kid, because the foods and the environments were all really cool to me. Like I will never forget the scene when they're on the train in the book. At least I know it's probably good in the movie too, but I never really cared too much for the movies. But in the book, J.K. Rowling goes on for like 10 pages about them just eating some fucking snacks, right? And that to me was always the reason I was drawn to Harry Potter. It was the slice of life world building, and my most profound memories of all of these fantasy novels I read as a kid, right, were always the world building, right? It was always the magic systems. Because that's really what sticks out to me even to this day. I really like these complex systems. I like these quantifiable phenomena, right? And I I only really learned how to appreciate soft magic systems by watching that one guy's videos and those. Like, they should show up the moment you search like soft magic system on YouTube, where he goes over like, look, stop being a retard. You don't need to know everything. Magic is more effective when it's magic, right? And it's like, yeah, that makes sense to me, right? Because magic isn't supposed to be just a system, right? Because systems, for the sake of systems, don't really have that much merit, right? They aren't that interesting. But a magic system, right, as a story element, can be incredibly interesting, right? And as a story element, soft magic systems just do it better. But I'm not really personally into soft magic systems, right? That's never been the thing that grips me on a personal level. Like ambiguity, right? Isn't something that I ever cared about. Like mysteries, secrets. I know that thematically or narratively, these are fucking amazing, right? Wow, you can create really intense experiences and you can create like a sense of wonder, and so on and so on and so on. But I never cared for the sense of wonder. I always really like the answers. I like, and I know it's like it's about the journey, not the destination. But like, the destination is always the part that interests me, right? Not because of necessity, but because the journey necessarily involves mysteries and questions and things like that. And I was never really into any of those things. I was always into the answers. I really liked when I could put all of these things in a system and categorize them and quantify them, because my autistic brain just likes being able to take my fucking grubby hands, put them on something, and fucking put it in a completely understandable, comprehensible system, and just remove all the magic from it, remove all the mysteries from it, and just arrive at a place where I feel like I understand it. If you're a long time Toadsmite viewer, you might be like, Toadsmite, you're just rehashing Zenith. You've really fucking fallen off, Toadsmite. You have to fucking remake videos you made 6 months ago. Because to an extent that's true, right? I'm basically just talking about all the same things I talked about in Zenith. Because this is another abstract fucking Naruto video I'm making. But I felt like that background context was important. I felt like I had to establish every part of that setup, right, and in an abstract way, so I could actually get to the part that I really wanted to talk about. Because I feel like I've made good points about Naruto, right? I've gotten to a point where people respect the fact that I like Naruto, right? That's no longer something that I have to defend. I don't have to go like, oh, I like Naruto because I'm the vacuum Dotesmite, and then people are like, yeah, that's cool that you like Naruto. But I feel like Naruto itself, right? At least in my circle, isn't really getting the respect it deserves. Because it's not like I had this powerful experience that I have had with Naruto just because it happened to be the thing that I stumbled upon. There is something special in the show, and if I tried to just explain it in words and explain it without referencing every surrounding element that was important to me, I feel like I would end up doing a massive disservice to the show, and I feel like I wouldn't be able to properly explain why I like it so much. Like I could talk about how great the soundtrack is, because it has one of the all time greatest soundtracks in my opinion. Because not only are the actual songs great, but the way that they're utilized and the way that leitmotifs go throughout the soundtrack, right? And the very careful placement of songs manages to just convey emotion without even having to watch the show. You could just listen to the soundtrack and get a lot of the emotional context of the show. And that to me is really inspiring and powerful, right? I could talk about how Shippuden, right, has these themes of how an individual can't really change the world just by themselves, right? And how it's necessary to approach the world from a standpoint of just trying to make your own positive change and trying to make sure that the people who you change in a positive way will then go on to change other people in a positive way, right? I could talk about all of that, and I could go on a rant about, like, look, Naruto isn't really bad, and it's just the last arc that's bad. And that just gives people who hate Naruto, like, a great deal of ammunition to just say that the whole show is bad because it ends in a bad way, which to an extent is fair, right? To an extent, I understand why people don't want to be heavily invested in something when it's bound to end up being kind of bad at the end, right? And I could talk about how Naruto was only disliked because young people were very heavily disliked at the point in time where Naruto was really prevalent online, right? Because the audience for Naruto were all young people, and being young at that point in time was very uncool. It was cool to be a fucking millennial, right? Because that was the wave, and Gen Z was just cringe and so on and so on and so on. But none of these things would actually express why Naruto itself is important to me, at least, right? None of these things could ever really make the point that I'm trying to make, because I'm not trying to analyze Naruto into you liking it. I'm not trying to go like, oh, if I'm smart enough, then all of my friends will suddenly want to watch Naruto, because that's not my goal. Because to an extent, the reason why Naruto is so important to me is the reason why it can't be important to anyone else that hasn't gone through the same experiences I have. Because I have been watching Naruto on and off for my whole life, right? Like, Naruto was the first thing that really taught me that it was okay to be obsessive, and it was okay to be dedicated, and it was okay to do the same thing and fixate on the same thing for as long as you possibly can, because that would have good results, right? I didn't just learn that from the ether. I learned it from Naruto, right? It gave me a great deal of comfort when I had, for my whole life up until that point, only experienced pain for being autistic and obsessive. And there was this character, right, who was considered powerful and who was considered virtuous because he could be really dedicated, right? That was really important to me. If you haven't gone through that experience, that won't be anywhere near as important to you as it was for me. I could talk about how I returned to Naruto when I had taken that mentality too far, right? I returned to Naruto when I had been torturing myself and burning out, and I couldn't do anything other than watch it, right? And how in times like that it provided me this amazing sense of comfort that I couldn't get from anywhere else. And during times like that, even when I saw how Naruto as an anime really wasn't that well constructed, even when I started seeing the flaws of the show, even when I started seeing every bad aspect of the show, like how, oh yeah, Sakura really was useless, and oh yeah, these fight scenes really were too drawn out, and oh yeah, the Rasengan wasn't actually that cool, and all of those things, right? Right, even when I saw all of those flaws, I could also start seeing a lot of things that I really didn't see as a kid, right? I could see how cool Rock Lee was, which I never properly appreciated when I was a kid. And I could see how Shikamaru is one of the best written characters in any anime, right? And not just in the first part, but in the second half of Naruto in the Shippuden half, Shikamaru has probably one of the most powerful arcs I've seen in anime. And I could see how the world building, right, wasn't just arbitrary and uh, made strictly in the service of the story, but how the world actually felt alive, and how global political dynamics were very present and very interesting, and how a lot of attention had gone to creating different cultures and imagining how those cultures interact with each other, and how Naruto is just constructed in a really soulful, heartful way, right? And I could see, right, throughout my life, when I've talked to other people is that the people who really need a Naruto, right? It seems like this, right? Where the people who really enjoy Naruto are the people who really need it, right? It's not like people who have had happy lives, right, with great comfort turn to Naruto, right? It's never those people. Those people always seem to like gravitate towards things that are like more edgy to an extent, right? Those types of people seem to gravitate towards things like Bleach, right? It at least seems to me. And the people who gravitate to Naruto, right, are always the outcasts, right? Are always the people who have had to deal with the struggles. They're actually depicted within the anime itself, right? And how this simple kids cartoon, right, has brought so much comfort to so many people who really, really needed it, right? I could go over all of that, and that's the important thing, right? But I feel like the best expression for why I like Naruto is just my whole life, right? It's everything I've ever made, right? It's it's everything I've ever lived to an extent. Because Naruto was such a formative series to me and it's been so present throughout my life that I can't untangle my life from it, right? So it's hard to discuss Naruto for me. It would be impossible to analyze it. It would be impossible to deconstruct it and reconstruct it in such a way that people could appreciate, right? I could point out some specific moments, right? I'm actually gonna point out some specific moments, just just so you would get the just so you would get why Naruto is so fucking amazing, even if you don't want to watch it, because I don't think an adult can get into Naruto in the same way that a kid can, right? I don't think you can have your first watch of Naruto when you have your life at least somewhat figured out, right? And I don't think you could get that much from it, you know. So there's this scene with Kara, right, where Kara's abilities have always been depicted as him shielding himself off from the world, right? All throughout the arc, Kara is depicted as having these shells, right? And you can see that his offensive powers, right, are just purely ruthless. They're horrifying to an extent that you haven't seen anywhere else. Even when it comes to like the most dangerous situations you had seen before then, even when it comes to the villains of the series, you never saw pointless ruthlessness. But in the case of Gara, right, there's that iconic scene where you're first introduced to him and he uses the sand coffin on just some guy, right? He didn't need to. It wasn't useful to him. But he just fucking obliterates that person and makes him into a non-existence and then absorbs his fucking vitals through his fucking sand, right? And then you slowly start seeing flashbacks into Kara's life, right? When Kara is shielded off from the world and the only place he has left to return to is his own memories and his own past, right? You see how he has himself been rejected by the world for his own life, for his entire life, right? You see how his parents, right, have both just completely rejected him and actively tried to kill him, right? You see that the only people who he trusted, right, eventually were forced to turn against him. And you see how he has only encountered resentment, not because he did anything wrong, but because he had a tailed beast inside him, right? And you see how, without actually having to say it, right, the anime never has to spell it out, but you see how the only reason why Kara is so ruthless is because he has never experienced love, right? He has never experienced anyone who sincerely cares about him. He has been let down by everyone, so he can't even appreciate the people who are loyal to him, right? He can't even appreciate the people who support him. So he's bound to go out of control. Because not only that, he has a literal demon inside him, basically, right? So he figuratively goes out of control, right? He has his fucking moment where he transforms into the one-tailed beast, right? And then you get a really cool fight, and you have these fucking great moments, and Kara is finally brought down, right? But he isn't punished, and not for any really contrived reason, right? It's not like he isn't punished because he didn't do anything wrong, right? It's because there's no need to, right? Like he has suffered enough, and the characters realize it to an extent. So what Naruto, the character, does is he goes up to Kara and says, "Look, you're not my enemy. You're my rival, right? You're someone who I have to compete against. You're someone who I have to take on, not to kill you, not to make sure that you die, right? That's not Naruto's goal. What Naruto wants is to keep his friends alive. And no matter how enraged he is, because he is angry, right? He can't stand how Kara hurt his friends, right? But no matter how much he cares for his friends, he realizes that Kara isn't evil, right? Because that's the real power that Naruto has, right? That's what makes Naruto unique. It's not his special bloodline as would be revealed later, right? It's not his dedication or his perseverance, right? It's none of that. Like Naruto's real power, right? The real distinctive factor is his ability to have a great sense of empathy towards everyone. Because he himself needed empathy more than anyone else. And his defining character moment when he when he got empathy shown to him by Iruka for the first time in a real way, right? He sees that this teacher who he's on kind of tenuous terms with, right? Because he sees that this teacher supports him, right? Because this teacher who has every right to be as indifferent and contemptuous of Naruto as the rest of the villagers, right? This teacher has been treating him well on a personal level, but he still has to act as a teacher, and he still has to like fucking put Naruto down when Naruto can't prove himself, right? Because that's just his job, and he can't really do anything against that other than treat Naruto as well as he can in every other situation possible. And then Naruto sees that at times of stress, it is not just that he was pandered to, right? Nothing like that. The teacher is willing to lay his life down for Naruto because the teacher knows that that's what his responsibility is, and that's how much empathy he has towards Naruto, right? So Naruto himself does everything in his own power to protect the teacher, right? Because the teacher is now important to him. And the teacher immediately, right, combines all the roles that he has had and sees that Naruto could prove himself, and he gives Naruto the headband. And that is a defining moment of the show, right? That defines the entire fucking series going forward. And Naruto carries that empathy with him, and he extends that to everyone around him, right? And he manages to extend that fucking empathy to Kara. And then, over time, you see how Kara himself, right, becomes more comfortable with the demons he has, right? And he can too acknowledge Naruto not as an enemy, but as a rival. And he can have a place where he's respected, right? He's the most fucking respected person in his own village, right? He, to an extent, beats Naruto because he becomes able to be the Kage before Naruto can be the Hokage, right? And Naruto is proud of him, right? Because the empathy he showed to Gaara managed to inspire him, and even if he did technically beat Naruto, right? Even if Gaara technically did get further than Naruto faster, he still respects Naruto. And that to me, like, that encapsulates the entire fucking beauty of the show. Because it's all of these powerful narratives, right? It's oh, there's powerful narratives, and it's just well constructed. Aside from that, right? It's not just that, oh, hey, look, it's all about empathy, right? The show never presents as if that's the only answer, right? The show just says that if it's possible, it's the best answer. It's always better to understand people and not to see people as your enemies, right? But the show doesn't go like, oh, if you see people as your enemies, then you're actually the real bad guy, right? Because the characters in Naruto kill, right? The characters in Naruto defend themselves, even if it requires, even if it requires ending someone else's life, right? The show never paints it as, oh, that's a bad thing to do. It just says that that isn't the best thing to do. The best thing to do is to just stop, right? And no character in Naruto is devoid of flaws. No character in Naruto is devoid of personality. Like, the most powerful trio in the Leaf Village, right, is, before, in the span of time before Naruto really came into fruition, and after the fourth Hokage died, right, the most powerful group of people from the Leaf Village were the Zenin, right? You had Naruto's mentor, right? You had fucking, I forget names really easily, right? I'm sorry. Chiruya, I think is the name, right? And then you had Orochimaru, right? And then you had the fifth Hokage, whose name I also forget. But all of these people had like really severe problems. Like Chiruya was a uh, a pervert, I guess. He wasn't really a sex addict, more so than he just wanted to see naked women, right? And he had other flaws, right? He was nowhere near a perfect person, but he was kind to the people who mattered, and he really cared about his friends, and he really cared about Naruto, right? And then you had the fucking fifth Hokage, right? Who uh, who was an alcoholic and a gambler, right? But despite that, when she realized how much she loved her village, right, she could go like, okay, I'm 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 gonna sacrifice a bit of this lifestyle that I've already kind of reached the end of, right? And I'm just gonna be the Hokage because that to me is where I can make the best impact, right? And Orochimaru is just straight up a villain, right? But Orochimaru isn't really a like completely black and white villain, even though the show often presents him as such, right? It's not like his goal is to achieve world domination, right? It's just his desire for science, right? His curiosity is so overwhelming that he just can't have any type of respect for people. He's so fixated on learning and knowledge that things like the value of human life and respect for others just end up being secondary to him. And all of these things, right? All of these things are just good, right? They're not mind breaking. They're not some wow, this is the best thing ever. But they're just good, right? It's just a good show. Like the I know Sasuke, right? Like there's the fucking Sasuke character moment, right, where Sasuke finally kills his brother, right, and gets revenge for his fucking clan, and he has fucking reached the peak of power. He's one of the most powerful people in the entire fucking planet at that point, right? And he realizes, right, he realizes that the reason his brother killed his family, right, and the reason his brother died in his own fucking arms, basically, was because everything he ever did was to protect him, right? Like his brother killed his family because the entire family was involved in like a plot to destroy the Leaf Village, and he had to kill the family because otherwise Sasuke himself would have been killed, and there would have been a giant war, right? And his brother eventually died because he himself did not want to kill Sasuke, right? He wanted to protect Sasuke, and he wanted to give Sasuke his fucking eyes because he didn't want Sasuke to go through the experiences that he had gone through, right? Where he had to lose his friends and he had to make all of these sacrifices, right? He wanted Sasuke to be able to avoid that, right? And then Sasuke's fucking heart just breaks, right? The reason he abandoned his village, right? The reason he went against the person who he respected the most at that point, in a way that he couldn't even describe, because he was so overwhelmed by jealousy, right? But he did truly respect Naruto, right? And the reason he had dedicated himself for revenge was just pointless, right? And all that was left for him was the fucking eyes. And he just took the fucking eyes, right? It's the only thing he had left. And his anger was no longer directed at his brother, right? He no longer needed revenge because there was nothing he could take revenge on except the entire fucking world. Because the world had deprived him of the one person who cared about him. And he had to kill him not because he had ever wronged him, but because he was the only person who refused to, you know? So what Sasuke ended up doing, right, was he ended up deciding that his real enemies, right, his real opposition was the Leaf Village, because these plans, these plots, right, that led him down the path of destruction was due to a systemic failure by the village, right? And he didn't want to accomplish anything. He had already built his entire life up for revenge, and now he had no one to direct it against. So the only thing left for him to do was to direct it against the village. But over time, as he goes around the world more, he learns more. He realizes that not only did his brother care about him, his brother also equally cared about the village. And he realizes that growing up, right, accepting his own life, right, means that he also has to come to peace with his village, right? He has to come to peace with all the things that happened. And he'll always be a broken person, right? Sasuke has been wronged by the world sufficiently that he'll never be able to be a part of it. But he can accept that, right? And this this entire arc, right? This entire arc obviously is a fantastical arc, right? Obviously doesn't reflect problems that real people have. Like, very few people have had their entire family killed by their brother, right? But the emotions and the stories that come out of this, right, are way beyond like, oh, Sasuke's edgy and prudy, wow. And I feel like a lot of it has been reduced to this by like this memification, right? Where, yeah, it's true that a lot of people liked Sasuke because he was edgy and prudy, right? But it's also like that it's not poorly constructed, right? It's not like Sasuke is just an edgelord, right? It's not that Sasuke is like this fucking one-dimensional Mr. Edgy McCool, right? It's, and I know it's all silly. It's all very fucking silly. It's not, it's not real, but it works because it isn't real. If it was real, it couldn't come to these conclusions, right? If it was telling real stories, it would have to accept a perpetual stasis, right? And if it was telling real stories, it would have to accept like a sense of stagnation and a sense of futility and powerlessness, right? It couldn't be empowering if it was real. But since it conveys all of these emotions through this really fantastical lens, it can translate the value of friendship and like coming to peace with the world and managing to prove yourself and finally be able to find confidence in yourself. It manages to present all of these really important human stories, right? In a way that isn't futile, in a way that isn't hopeless. So when you're a kid who feels powerless, right, you can feel empowered by this series, right? You can feel like the fantastical world that Naruto presents you, right, can can actually lead like you having a way to improve in the real world. But it's not an experience that can be easily like translated, right? Like fucking no matter how I tell you about fucking Naruto, right? I can never fully convey how how attached I got to like the Naruhina ship as a kid, and how much I wanted those two characters to end up together, right? Because they were perfect complements to each other. Where Naruto was in desperate need of acknowledgement, and Hinata was the one person who could acknowledge Naruto, not for anything superficial, but because she saw Naruto as the empathetic, kind person he was, right? Like Hinata was the only person who saw Naruto for what really made him special, and how this was beautifully expressed in the pain arc, right? Even if it was through like this really dramatic, theatrical way, right? And how happy I was when I learned that those two characters had ended up together, right? And how just fucking emotional the final Naruto movie made me. Because I could see these two characters who I had been rooting for finally discover that they could be important to each other, right? Like, this isn't something I can ever properly, like, convey. And I can't, like, fucking give you the countless hours I spent in the Naruto wiki, both as a kid and when I was rewatching it, to fully appreciate all of the systems in place and fully appreciate all of the characters and subtleties and nuances, right? And I, I just, I don't want to be like you had to be there because I never feel like you actually had to be there. I don't think time is that linear, but it's more like if you cared, right, you could have similar experiences, but there's no way to want to care if you didn't already care. It's like it's something so personal and intimate to me that I can't bear the fact that other people can't appreciate. But it's also impossible to make other people appreciate it. I just, I just want proper respect on the anime. Really, I'm not the person who can do it, right? I'm not like the person who can create like tea analysis video on Naruto. I'm not the person who can make the video that goes like Naruto is good and here's why. That shifts the entire perspective on Naruto in the anime community, right? I can't be a reverse digi, right? I can't be like Sword Art Online is bad and here's why, and then people will slowly start changing their mind and Sword Art Online, right? I can't plant that fucking seed in people's head in such an effective way because I'm not a good analyst, right? But I really wish I was because in situations like this, right? In situations like this, I really wish I could convey intimate experiences in a rational and communicable way, right? I really wish I really wish I could fucking have a society where I can go on fucking like an anime discussion board or a Discord or whatever and be like, yeah, I like Naruto, and everyone goes like, oh yeah, that was a good show. Yeah, it had its flaws. Right, the ending was kind of shit, But it was a good show. It had these really cool OPs and DDs, right? It had a great sound design. It had some really cool battles with innovative animation, right? It had all of these cool concepts, and it had in-depth world building and really compelling character stories, and it had all of those cool things. Yeah, that's a good anime, right? That's something respectable to like. Because I don't care if people respect what I like, but I want people to respect something that I just can't see as bad, right? But it's just every time you fucking post about Naruto, it's like either people who have had the similar experiences, right? Who go like, yeah, that was a great show, right? That was a really heartfelt, beautiful experience to go through. And then you have the other fucking half of people being like, oh, fucking Naruto tards, zoomer cringe, right? Like, are you 12? Why do you like Naruto? I'm not the fucking person who can do that, right? I'm not a taste maker. I'm I'm not an analyst, right? I'm just someone who likes cool shows, right? I'm just someone who makes videos because I like making videos. And there's this degree of frustration, right, that comes with it, right? Like there's this degree of there's this degree of knowing that I could be the one who makes teen Naruto video, right? If I spent a month fucking doing research and fucking trying to get my thoughts in order, and if I managed to get the fucking golden points from somewhere deep within myself, and if I spent another month editing and writing a video, right? And if I put all of this time into it, I could make the definitive Naruto video, right? And maybe a few thousand people would see it, and maybe some more people would respect Naruto, right? But it's like, I would hate doing that. I would hate the process. I would feel like it would fucking tear my entire soul to pieces. But I know I could do it. I know if I was a different person, I could fucking do it. But I'm toad smart. I'm not very good at emotions. I'm not very good at analysis. I'm not very good at most things. I can write succinctly, and I've had a lot of practice making videos. And I feel like they should be more useful than they are when it comes to trying to express something I really care about. But they just aren't. And so I'm just kind of stuck. And I really hope that at least in some small way I was able to make you appreciate Naruto more. Because that's really, really what I wanted to do here.